Alright, guys. Still in Exodus, one of the things that I was reading through and kind of stood out to me this morning was in chapter 4. Moses is making his way out of Midian. He's going to start to make his way towards Egypt, and he's taking Zipporah, which is his wife, and his son. I don't think they gave the name of his son here in this passage, but that he's before the Lord, and the Lord is basically saying, "I'm going to kill your son." And Zipporah quickly took and circumcised the boy, and that stayed the Lord's wrath there. And remembering that in Romans 2:29, that circumcision was something that was symbolic of something that was to come later on. It talks about this in Deuteronomy 30 and in Deuteronomy 10 as well, that circumcision is something that is done of the heart. Even the circumcision of the penis is something that is done to show an inward change, an inward obedience to God. So the circumcision that we're looking for is circumcision of the heart. And then in my reading, going through in chapter 12, it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses and unto Aaron," he's talking about the Passover now, and he's talking about how to prepare the Passover and what's to be done. And he just got done telling him, okay, you're supposed to have this Passover feast, and now he's telling him this is who can take it and who can't. And it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof, but every man his servant that is bought for money. When thou hast circumcised him, then he can eat thereof. A foreigner and a hired servant shall not eat thereof." And it goes on to talk about that that those who are not circumcised cannot partake in the Passover. And we know that Passover is a sort of a symbology for Jesus' blood, and how the blood was spread on the doorposts, and that in that time the destroyer did not, when he passed over the house, he did not kill the firstborn thereof, and so on and so forth. So we know that that Jesus is the Passover lamb. But one of the things that kind of stood out was with respect to the fact that circumcision had something to do with the Passover and who could partake in it and who didn't. And then, like I said, in Romans 2, it talks about how Paul is talking about how circumcision is something that is done of the heart in the spirit, that it is that change, that inward rebirth that is done by God. But we see that a similar circumstance in 1 Corinthians 11, verses 25 to 32, with respect to taking communion. And Paul says, "After the same manner also he took the cup, then he had supped, saying, This is the cup, the New Testament in my blood. This do ye as often as ye drink it, in remembrance of me." And he's talking about taking. Actually, if you back up to verse 24, it says, take and eat this. This is my body. And this, Paul is quoting what Jesus had said regarding taking the bread and this being symbolic of the body, and taking the blood and this being symbolic of the blood. But then he goes on to caution in verse 27, "Wherefore whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Lord unworthily shall be guilty of the body and of the blood of the Lord." And what Paul is talking about here is he's talking about the same thing that God was talking about in the book of Exodus, where only those who were circumcised, once again we're talking circumcision in heart, only those who were circumcised were allowed to partake in the Passover feast, and thus celebrate the fact that God had passed over judgment. If they were not circumcised, then you have a kind of a circumstance where you have the tares in with the weeds. So you have those who are uncircumcised in the same house as those who are circumcised, and that's what God was talking against. And we see something similar here. What Paul is talking about here is not participating in these self-righteous religious activities where you just show up to church and then you're taking the communion and you're taking part in all these things without having any sort of connection or relationship to God. No circumcision of heart, no rebirth, no belief. You're just kind of going through the motions, and this is, according to Paul, I mean, this is despicable in the Lord's eyes, that you're playing the part but not actually grasping the Lord. It's actually a form of self-righteousness and self-glorification, because you're wanting people to kind of see what it is that you're doing without actually surrendering to the Lord. So something that kind of stood out with regard to the Passover, who could partake in it, and how circumcision tied in, and then in 1 Corinthians and Romans, the communion and how that ties into to being circumcised in heart and reborn and so on and so forth. So, all right, you guys comment, leave any questions.